from TTY7. To work around this, utilize TTY1 when running quota check. To do that, do Control and Alt and then F1 to go to TTY1. When you're done, do Control Alt F7 to go to TTY7. Now that I'm logged back in, I prepared my file system for quotas, but whenever I use quota check, at least on this flavor and version of Ubuntu 10.10, I've noticed that, again, I need to go to TTY1. Let me show you what I'm talking about. If I try to run quota check from TTY7, here's what I'm getting. It'll toil and toil and toil, and basically, even though I'm using root privileges, I don't have permission from this terminal. So again, if you're going to do quota check, then you really only have to do that occasionally for maintenance. At this point, I would go to TTY1. Now that's not the case with other versions of Fedora and other versions of Ubuntu, but each new flavor, each development sometimes comes out with bugs, and they add some new things, and sometimes they break some old things, or they modify some. There's some configuration files and things that are still sort of under development. And so if you see this, I did this to produce this arrow so you could see it. But if you see this, just realize that a workaround is go to TTY1 and log in there and run quota check from that terminal, and then come back to TTY7 to do other things that you need to do. Now from TTY7, once I've done that, prepared my file system, I can turn quotas on and off quite easily. And in order to do that, again, I would need root privileges sudo and the commands quota on. And the switches are usually AVUG. And I can turn quotas off with the same switches. Quota off. Let me turn them back on. Configure quotas on a user account. To do this, use sudo add quota-u and then the user. Alright, so let's go and actually create a configuration file. And let's apply this to some users. So real quick, I'm going to make some users. And let me see what we have. Alright, it's just me right now in the home folder. So I'm going to do sudo user add -d to create a home directory. And we'll make a user called user1, and he'll be named user1. And we'll make another user called user2, home directory user2, and user2. And let's set the password, sudo password, user1, and PASS. Now watch, 5 minutes from now when we log in this time, I won't remember it, but PASS and 2 will do the same thing. You can't brute force my password, all lowercase PASS. But anyway, alright, so we have our users now, and if I look, they also have directories, and look at who the owner, the group ownership, and the owner, user owner are respective of those users, just like my directory belongs to me, their directories belong to them, respectively. So we're ready to start implementing some quotas. To briefly review our options. Now before we edit the quota files, let's go over the switches real quick for the commands that we've used so far. So remember this command sudo, and we did quota check, and the commands we used were MAVUG. So let's go over these switches or these options one at a time. If I were to pull up the man page, the lowercase m option specifies that I should not try to remount the file system. In this case it's read only. If it's lowercase m, if it were uppercase m, it would force checking and remounting of the file system as read-write. But that wouldn't be a good idea unless we could be 100% positive that no process would be writing to the file system. Otherwise, it could corrupt the file system. We'd have to reboot and run FSCK and bad things there. So no capital M, but lowercase m, that option. The next one, A, the lowercase a means check all of the mounted non-NFS, in other words, the non-network file systems in etc mtab. And remember the mtab, if I type the mount command, those are the commands that are actually, what's listed in mtab is pretty much what I'm getting when I type the mount command. V is for verbose, and we're all familiar with that, but that just causes it to report on its progress as it runs and not to run in the background on silent mode, which is sort of the default setting. So you want that because if you get any errors or problems, you want to see what they are in verbose mode. U in this case specifies only basically only check for user quotas listed in the etc mtab file, and then G is basically the same thing for group, only check for group quotas in the etc mtab file. Okay, and again, if I were to cat that, let me do cat etc and mtab, you can see all of these mounted directories in my mounted file system. Well, if I type in the mount command, I pretty much get the same thing. So it's just reading the /etc/mtab file. So quota check, those first 5 options are switches, MAVUG, that's what they stand for. And now what about quota on and quota off? Alright, so the first one we did was quota on, and we just did AVUG. So again, let's take a look at the switches there. The first one, A, is for all. So enable all the file systems in the etc fstab file that are set up for quotas or that have the quota option, like the one that we just added to the fstab file. V is for verbose mode, again to display any messages or errors and things not to run in the background. U is for users. In other words, manipulate, modify, change user quotas, and G is for groups, manipulate, modify, change group quotas. And actually, quota off is the same thing. The A, it would be all file systems in the etcfs tab file. V would be verbose, display any messages, don't run in the background. And then U would be user, and G would be group for either turn on or turn off quotas for either users or groups. So we've gone over those options there. Let's go back to step 9. Configure quotas on a user account. Again, use sudo add quota-u and the username. Okay, let's zoom in here and let's edit some quota files. Alright, so to do that I need to use the command add quota. And of course I need root privileges, so sudo add quota. And remember, one of the users we created was user1, so we're going to edit the quota for that user. Now when you open the configuration file, you'll see soft and hard. Now the soft is the amount of space that they can use until they start to get a warning. So in other words, if I set this for 5 megabytes, 5,000 bytes, then once that user had consumed 5 megabytes of space, then they would start getting warned. That's the soft limit. Now the hard limit would be the actual maximum number of amount of disk space they'd be allowed to use before they were forbidden to use any more. So I'm going to make that 10 megabytes, so 5 megabytes and 10 megabytes. And there's also something called a grace period, which we can set with the command add quota-t. And the grace period is the number of days they would have. In other words, if I had exceeded my soft limit, but not my hard limit, that would be the number of days I would have to sort of get my house in order. But let's take a look at these two without really setting the grace period yet. So we'll set a soft limit of 5 megabytes, a hard limit of 10 megabytes. And yes, I know, obviously you wouldn't set limits that small for, in a real situation. It would be at least a couple of hundred megabytes, if not gigabytes. And typical usage of this would be like a file server in a large company, or what if you're in a service provider and maybe you're hosting websites and you sell different packages. For $5 a month you get 20 megabytes of space, and for $10 a month you get 100, and for $15 a month you get 200 megabytes, and $20 a month you get a gigabyte. So if that were the case, quotas is would be an effective and efficient way to implement that policy where you're like an internet service provider. So anyway, we set our soft and our hard limits, and we're going to save our configuration file. And now I just want to log out and log in as user1, and we'll go download a file and test those limits. Alright, so I'm going to get out of here, and let me go ahead and log out. And I'm going to log in as user1 with an incredibly hard to guess password of all lowercase pass. Super complex. Now that I'm logged in, I go over here and look at disk space. Let's take a look at our disk space here. And I'll put my working directory, so home user1. Of course, I'm user1. And let's see if there's anything here. Alright, so nothing here, so to speak. And nothing here. And downloads. Disk space usage here. I have plenty of free space. But let's test our quota limitations. I'm going to open a web browser. I'm going to try to download a file. And let me see, let me uncheck that option. Let's go on the web and let's go to Adobe's website. They always have nice big files. And here, and let's grab the Adobe Reader. I'm going to go ahead and download the Adobe Reader. And then download should start automatically. I can't get this file here. Alright, there we go. Alright, so there's a bin file, and this is, this file is fairly large. It's like 40 megabytes. So, and notice it's warning me here, there's not enough room on the disk to save in part. Remove this files, yeah, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so I can, I verified that my quota limitation is in place for user 1. And at that point, I either have to increase his quota limitation, or I have to tell him, I'm sorry, but you can't have that much file space for your files. Alright, and I'm still logged in as user 1. It's my working directory. I'm in his home folder. And here's a couple of files. I don't have sudo privileges here. I keep forgetting. Now, instead of logging out and logging in as me, let's practice what we were talking about sudo and the sudoers list the other day. That was a few tutorials back. So I'm going to do su substitute user, and even though I'm logged in as user 1, I'm going to temporarily access things as myself. So I'm logged in as me now, but if I print the working directory, notice I'm still in user 1's home folder. And this way I can gain sudo privileges, and the reason is I need sudo privileges or root privileges temporarily to run the add quota command. And I'm going to do it for user 1. I'm going to modify some limitations on user 1 here. Okay, and this time he has 10 megabytes or 10,000 bytes for the soft limit, and 100,000 bytes or 100 megabytes for the hard limit. And I'm going to do roughly about 50 here, 55, which would be, actually his basic limits. For soft limits, I'm going to do 50. Alright, so that should allow us maybe one download of Adobe, but then the next one it should block. And I can just try to demonstrate here, and then remember the grace period. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. Yes, to modify it. Let's make sure, 50 megabytes and 55 megabytes. Alrighty. And let's modify the default grace period. To do this, we'll use sudo add quota and the -t option. Now let's go ahead and look at the grace period with the -t option, right? So it's 7 days and 7 days. 7 days! Remember that movie, was it The Ring or whatever? It was real creepy. 7 days! Anyway, no, hopefully it's not creepy. But, so anyway, let's go ahead and try to, I'm going to exit, log back in as user 1. So I'm no longer CJOing, now I'm user 1 again. And let's open up Firefox and try to download Adobe and see if we can bust that quota. We should get one successful download, about 42 megabytes, but after that it should deny us permission to download it a second time. And let me go ahead and make sure. Alright, good. So let's go to Adobe's website and go here and go here and download this and save file. Zoom, there she goes. And she's loading. Okay, that was our first download. And if I go over here, do a long listing, you can see that it's about 45 megabytes there. It's about busted our limit. So let's try that again. And we'll save it. This time, shouldn't let us. We've got 45. There we go. We just busted our limit. All right. So there, our quota kicked in and said, "Hey, we can't." So just some of the preliminaries with quotas, and again, if you're kind of studying for those CompTIA Linux Plus exams, you'll want to familiarize yourself with quotas and things in both maybe Fedora, Red Hat, and Debian systems. So this has been Ubuntu, and I'll try to put one up a little bit later in Fedora, maybe 14 or Red Hat server as well. You can check your users and quota data with the rep quota command. To do this, use sudo rep quota-u, and for the root file system, root. And let's use one more tool before we go, and this will be the rep quota command, again from the quota tool package. And it'll display a report of quotas and things. Actually, let me use root privileges for sudo, and I'm going to specify u for the user option, and I'm going to specify the root mount point. Okay, and if I look here, the root mount point here, I've got user 2. In this case, there's no real quota set for them. In this case, here they have 6 days left on their grace period there, and then there's their 5, and then there's their 10. And if I go, look at, in this case, there's no quota set for me, no quota set for user 2. There's a quota set for user 1, but just a nice reporting tool that'll kind of let you look at disk limits and the way users are kind of, utilizing their disk space or how much disk space they're using when you're implementing quotas. And